In 1942, the United States Department of Agriculture released a film called Hemp for Victory. 14 minutes of urgent, patriotic instruction begging American farmers to grow as much hemp as possible. The war effort needed rope. It needed canvas. It needed fiber that only this plant could provide at scale. Farmers answered. Thousands of acres were planted across the Midwest. Then the war ended. The film vanished. When researchers requested it decades later, the government denied it existed. No record, no archive, no trace. Until 2 copies surfaced in private collections and forced the Library of Congress to acknowledge what had been erased. 5 years before that film was made, one man had already engineered the destruction of the entire hemp industry. Harry Anslinger, the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, needed an enemy to justify his new department's budget. He found it in a plant that had been grown legally on American soil for 300 years. What followed was one of the most documented corporate conspiracies in agricultural history. A newspaper magnate who owned timber forests, a chemical company that had just patented synthetic nylon, and a government official who needed a war. Together they buried a crop that could make paper, fuel, fabric, food, and medicine. This is how it happened. The archive opens in ancient China, roughly 8,000 BCE. Pottery shards bearing the impressions of hemp cord are among the earliest evidence of human agriculture. By 2800 BCE, Chinese Emperor Shen Nung had cataloged hemp as one of the 5 sacred grains alongside rice, wheat, barley, and soybeans. Not a luxury, a foundation. Hemp traveled the Silk Road into Persia, then India, then Europe. The word canvas derives from the Latin canapacius, meaning made of hemp. Every sail that crossed every ocean did so on hemp fiber. Every rope that held every anchor was braided from hemp stalks. The plant did not just accompany civilization, it enabled it. By the time European settlers reached North America, hemp was already woven into the economy of empire. And by 1938, a major American magazine would call it the new billion-dollar crop. But by then, the men who would destroy it had already made their move. In 1633, the Virginia Assembly passed Act 8, ordering every planter to provide seed of flax and hemp and sow the same. This was not a suggestion. It was a mandate from the British Crown. The Royal Navy depended on hemp rope and canvas. Without it, ships could not sail. Empires could not expand. By the mid-1700s, Virginia alone had 12,000 acres under hemp cultivation. Hemp was an accepted form of tax payment in the American colonies for over 150 years. George Washington grew it at Mount Vernon. Thomas Jefferson cultivated it at Monticello, where enslaved workers processed it into fiber and rope. Benjamin Franklin owned a hemp paper mill. When Thomas Paine published Common Sense in 1775, the pamphlet that ignited a revolution, he listed hemp among America's greatest strategic assets. The Declaration of Independence was drafted on hemp paper. The sails of the USS Constitution were hemp canvas. The crop was not marginal. It was the infrastructure beneath the nation. Here is what hemp actually produces. The stalks contain more than 77% cellulose, the raw material for over 25,000 industrial products, from dynamite to cellophane. The fiber yields more than 5,000 textile products, from rope to fine lace. 1 acre of hemp produces as much paper as 4 acres of trees. Trees take 20 years to mature. Hemp reaches harvest height in 90 days. It grows 8 to 12 feet tall, choking out every weed beneath its canopy. 2 successive crops can reclaim land abandoned to invasive species. It requires no pesticide and no herbicide. The plant is naturally resistant to most insects and disease, but the numbers go deeper. Hemp produces 250% more fiber per acre than cotton. Cotton demands 10,000 liters of water per kilogram of fiber. Hemp thrives primarily on rainfall. Cotton uses 16% of the world's pesticides. Hemp uses none. And hemp fiber has 3 times the tensile strength of cotton. It outlasts it in every application. Those numbers terrified three men. In 1930, Andrew Mellon was the Secretary of the Treasury and one of the wealthiest men in America. He had invested heavily in DuPont's new synthetic fiber, nylon. DuPont had also just patented a new sulfate process for making paper from wood pulp. Both products competed directly with hemp. Mellon appointed his future nephew-in-law, Harry Jacob Anslinger, as the first commissioner of the newly created Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Anslinger was 38 years old, zealous, and desperate for a mission. Prohibition was ending. The Bureau needed a new enemy to justify its existence. The third man was William Randolph Hearst. Hearst owned the largest newspaper chain in America and vast timber holdings across the country. Cheap hemp paper threatened his entire business model. His newspapers were printed on DuPont's wood pulp paper. If the hemp decorticator, a machine that could process hemp stalks at 2 to 3 tons per hour, reached commercial scale, Hearst's timber empire and DuPont's chemical patents would collapse. Whether these three men actively coordinated their campaign or simply recognized they shared a common enemy, the result was identical. Hemp had to be destroyed. Anslinger needed a weapon. He found one in language. The plant had been called hemp for 300 years. Every farmer knew it. Every sailor depended on it. So Anslinger stopped using the word hemp. He introduced a foreign-sounding term that most Americans had never heard: marijuana. The strategy was surgical. By renaming the plant, he severed the connection between the industrial crop in American fields and the substance he wanted to demonize. When he testified before Congress, most legislators did not realize that marijuana and hemp were the same plant. Hearst's newspapers provided the amplification. Stories depicting marijuana as a drug that caused insanity, murder, and racial corruption flooded front pages. Anslinger compiled what he called his Gore Files, a collection of fabricated and exaggerated police reports. His most infamous story involved Victor Licata, a Florida man who murdered his family with an axe. Anslinger blamed marijuana. Investigators later confirmed Licata had been flagged for commitment to a mental institution before he ever encountered cannabis. None of that mattered. The narrative was set. On April 14, 1937, Anslinger's ally, Representative Robert Doughton of North Carolina, a known DuPont supporter, introduced House Resolution 6385 to the 75th Congress. The hearings were poorly attended. The bill was disguised as a revenue measure, routed through the House Ways and Means Committee to avoid broader debate. The American Medical Association sent its legislative counsel, Dr. William Creighton Woodward, to testify. Woodward told the committee that the claims about marijuana addiction, violence, and overdose were not supported by evidence. He argued that the bill would burden medical research and that cannabis had legitimate pharmaceutical applications. The committee ignored him. When the bill reached the House floor, a representative asked if the AMA had taken a position. The committee's response: "The AMA is in complete agreement." It was a lie, documented in congressional records. On August 2, 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act became law. It imposed a prohibitive tax on every transaction involving cannabis, hemp included. The tax was not designed to generate revenue. It was designed to make hemp farming economically impossible. Within 2 years, the American hemp industry was dead, and the farmers who had grown it for generations lost everything overnight. In Kentucky, where hemp cultivation had sustained communities since the 1770s, entire county economies collapsed. Families who had farmed hemp for 5 generations watched their processing mills shutter. The skills that had been passed from father to son for 2 centuries vanished in a single legislative act. By 1940, Kentucky's hemp acreage had fallen to near zero. Here is what nobody examined at the time. In February 1938, just 6 months after the Tax Act took effect, Popular Mechanics published an article titled "New Billion-Dollar Crop." It was the first time the term billion-dollar had ever been applied to any American agricultural product. The article described a new machine, the decorticator, capable of processing hemp stalks at industrial scale for the first time. It predicted hemp would become America's largest cash crop, displacing foreign imports worth $200 million annually. The article had been written in the spring of 1937, before the Tax Act passed. The editors did not realize the crop had already been outlawed by the time the article went to print. In that same year, DuPont's annual report contained a passage that historians would study for decades. It warned that the company's future was clouded with uncertainties regarding the extent to which the revenue-raising power of government may be converted into an instrument for forcing acceptance of sudden new ideas of industrial and social reorganization. DuPont's nylon patent was secured. Hearst timber was protected. Anslinger had his war. The billion-dollar crop was buried before it could be born. Then came 1941. Japan seized the Philippines, cutting off America's primary source of Manila hemp. The Navy had no rope. The Army had no canvas. The government had no choice. The same USDA that had been silent during Anslinger's campaign now produced Hemp for Victory, a 14-minute propaganda film urging farmers to plant hemp immediately. The narration was urgent, patriotic, unapologetic. Tax stamps that had been impossible to obtain suddenly appeared. By the war's end, American farmers had planted over 400,000 acres of hemp across the Midwest. The moment Japan surrendered, the program was terminated. The tax stamps vanished. The film was pulled from circulation. For decades, the government denied it had ever existed. When researchers finally located 2 copies in private collections, the Library of Congress was forced to add it to the National Archive. A government that begged farmers to grow hemp in 1942 pretended it never happened by 1958. But here is what they could not erase from memory. On August 13, 1941, Henry Ford unveiled a prototype automobile at the Dearborn Days Festival in Michigan. The body panels were made from a biocomposite of hemp, soybeans, wheat, and flax, bound in a phenolic resin. 14 panels, each a quarter-inch thick, attached to a tubular steel frame. The car weighed 2,000 pounds, a full 1,000 pounds lighter than a standard steel automobile. Ford swung an axe into the trunk panel in front of reporters. The tool bounced off without leaving a mark. Popular Science reported the panels had 10 times the impact resistance of steel. Ford had spent 12 years developing the vehicle. He intended it to run on hemp ethanol. He told reporters he would grow automobiles from the soil. The vision was complete. A car made from crops, fueled by crops, built by farmers. World War II halted all civilian automobile production. After the war, the petroleum and steel industries had no interest in a competitor grown in fields. The prototype was quietly destroyed. No record of the formula survived. They buried the fiber. They erased the fuel. But they also made you forget that hemp was food. Crack open a hemp seed, and what you find inside looks like a small, pale heart, no bigger than a sunflower kernel. Inside that shell sits one of the most nutrient-dense foods ever analyzed. Hemp seeds contain 25% protein by weight, with all 9 essential amino acids, making them one of the rare, complete plant proteins on Earth. The 2 primary proteins, edestin and albumin, are among the most easily digested proteins ever measured. The oil content exceeds 30%, composed of over 80% polyunsaturated fatty acids. The ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 sits between 2:1 and 3:1, the range nutritional scientists consider optimal for human cardiovascular health. Hemp seeds also contain gamma-linolenic acid and stearidonic acid, anti-inflammatory compounds found in few other food sources. 3 tablespoons, 10 grams of protein, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, iron, vitamin E, naturally gluten-free, no processing required to be edible. For thousands of years, these seeds were a staple food across Asia and Europe. Then they were classified alongside heroin. But the food was not even the biggest secret they buried. In 2016, a French construction firm completed a residential building using hempcrete, a composite of hemp herds and lime. for the walls. The material was lighter than concrete, naturally fireproof, mold-resistant, and provided insulation so effective the building required almost no heating system. But the engineers noticed something else. The walls were actively absorbing carbon dioxide from the air. The building was not carbon neutral. It was carbon negative. It was sequestering more CO2 than had been emitted during its entire construction. Here is the math the petrochemical industry truly cannot afford you to know. Hemp absorbs between 22 and 44 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per growing season. That is more than any commercial forest, 4 times the sequestration rate of cotton. It matures in 90 days. You harvest it twice per year. Every acre planted actively pulls carbon from the atmosphere. No chemical inputs, no fossil fuel dependency, no compromise. 1 ton of dry hemp locks away approximately 325 kilograms of CO2. The construction material industry is worth over $10 trillion globally. Hempcrete threatens that model with a product that grows in a field, insulates a home, and cleans the atmosphere while doing it. Drive through rural Nebraska or Iowa in late summer, and you will see it. Tall, angular plants growing wild in road ditches and along abandoned rail lines. Feral hemp, descended from the wartime fields of 1943, still pushing through the soil 8 decades after the government pretended it never asked farmers to grow it. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 finished what the Marijuana Tax Act started. All forms of cannabis, including industrial hemp containing negligible THC, were classified as Schedule I drugs alongside heroin and LSD. The distinction between a drug and a crop was deliberately obliterated. For the next 48 years, American farmers were prohibited from growing a plant their ancestors had been legally mandated to cultivate. Canada legalized industrial hemp in 1998. The European Union never banned it. China remained the world's largest producer. American farmers watched from behind federal law, while the rest of the world built hemp industries worth billions. The pattern repeats: a plant that cannot be patented, a crop that requires no purchased inputs, a material that outperforms industrial alternatives, a food that replaces supplements. When a single organism threatens timber, petroleum, cotton, synthetic fiber, chemical fertilizer, and pharmaceutical markets simultaneously, the response is always the same: reclassify it, redefine it, erase it. In 2018, the Farm Bill reclassified industrial hemp, defined as cannabis containing less than 0.3% THC, as a legal agricultural commodity. American farmers could grow hemp again for the first time in half a century. The global hemp market was valued at over $4 billion. Projections estimate it could reach $36 billion by 2030. But the infrastructure was gone. Processing facilities, supply chains, institutional knowledge, all of it had been dismantled over 80 years of prohibition. Farmers who planted hemp in 2019 found no local processors. Harvests rotted in barns. The market existed in theory, but not in practice. 80 years of suppression cannot be reversed by a single bill. The knowledge gap is generational. The ancestors who grew hemp are dead. The children who might have inherited that knowledge were taught the plant was poison. Every acre planted in hemp is a direct challenge to the system that buried it. The seeds are available, commercially, legally, in all 50 states. The soil is ready. Hemp improves it, breaking compaction with deep taproots and leaving the ground in better condition than it found it. 90 days is all it takes. No herbicide needed. The dense canopy, reaching 8 to 12 feet, shades out competing weeds within weeks. No pesticide needed. The plant handles that itself. No corporation needed. The crop does the work. The seeds are edible raw, roasted, or pressed into oil. The fiber becomes textiles, paper, insulation, or biocomposites. The herds become hempcrete, animal bedding, or bioplastic. Every part of the plant is usable. Nothing is waste. Every handful of hemp seed you eat is a product no corporation can patent. Every rope, Every textile, every wall built from hemp fiber is infrastructure that exists outside their supply chain. The story of industrial hemp is not about a plant. It is about what happens when a natural resource threatens the wrong balance sheet. Three men in 1937 did not ban hemp because it was dangerous. They banned it because it was too useful, too versatile, too free. A crop that makes 25,000 products cannot be monopolized. A fiber that outperforms cotton and nylon cannot be patented. A food that contains complete protein and optimal fatty acids cannot generate pharmaceutical revenue. A building material that sequesters carbon cannot coexist with an industry that profits from emissions. Hemp did not disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it succeeded at everything. And the industries it threatened had the money, the media, and the political connections to bury it. In 1942, the United States government produced a film begging American farmers to grow hemp. By 1958, they denied it ever existed. But the film survives. The plant survives. And now, so does the truth. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nature Unearthed and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.